Thank you for joining us on Community Watch today. And today we're having a fascinating conversation with Lucy Hale from the League of Women Voters. Stay tuned. Community Watch starts now.
Welcome to Community Watch. Greg, how are you?
Good, doctor. Just fine, good, doctor. And yourself?
I'm doing well. And we are thrilled to have with us today Lucy Hale from the League of Women Voters. Lucy, welcome.
Hello.
It's great to have you.
Thank you.
And today is the first day of early voting, which is just, I guess, a coincidence that we're talking with you on that day. At least that's the day that we're taping this show. It probably will not be the day most people see it. But why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about what the League of Women Voters is for folks who may not know that?
Okay. Well, the League of Women Voters is a 100-plus-year-old nonpartisan organization, and the purposes of it, just summarized in the mission, are to empower voters and to protect democracy. And the League of Women Voters was formed largely by suffragists. In this country, we have suffragists. In Great Britain, we have suffragettes. Suffragettes was a dismissive, derogatory term, and the Great Britain women adopted and said, okay, call me a suffragette. But in this country, we said suffragists. So we have chapters in every state, numerous chapters in some states, and we have an organization that has, it's sort of a confederacy in that there are positions that the League of Women Voters takes as a nonpartisan organization. We cannot support or work against any specific candidate or political party. But one of the most important purposes of the League that started in 1919, 100 plus years ago, was to educate new women voters, because across the country, women were just being allowed to vote. Not in Georgia, because Georgia was adamant that women shouldn't vote, and they sent an objection all the way to the Supreme Court. So in Georgia, women could not use the federal law for the 19th Amendment until 1922. So we're nonpartisan, but there's an enormous amount of research done on positions. And the reason we're a women's group is because women weren't allowed to vote, and the League of Women Voters was part of a major group of women who were working for the 19th Amendment. At the early We had in 1919, there was a League of Women Voters in Rome, Georgia, but it was all white, and League of Women Voters was all white. All the suffragists were not excluding Black women, because Black women were tremendously important in getting the 19th Amendment passed. In fact, some of the articles and some of the things that were written and presented in lectures that were highly influential were from Black women. But the thought was, of the League of Women Voters founders, that it was too much to work for suffrage for Black women and white women. It would knock out anybody getting it. They were wrong. They tried to exclude some people like Ida B. Wells, who you know was an amazing Black woman who was a journalist, and she gathered money and influence from Great Britain to support the 19th Amendment. That black mark on the League of Women Voters was pretty much erased fairly early, and we're now partners with all of the other organizations that the women's organizations that were influential in passing the 1964-1965 Voters Act. So that's what the League of Women Voters is. And some people would say, well, why is it women voters? And we're not exclusive since 1972. John, we expect you to, and Greg, to join. Men are welcome. But there is a difference in the way women vote and men vote. It's not a huge gap, but it is a significant gap, and it is actually it seems to be a fact. And of course, that would make sense because women are largely the caregivers. So women have a commitment to and exposure to issues that have to do with families, children, caring for people. And they're in professions that are caring professions. For a long time, they were exclusively in those because they were forbidden to be in others. So that's what we are. Locally, in all of the chapters, some of the things that all the League of Women Voters chapters do, we are observers. We send our representatives from our chapters to the election boards in every county, where we serve, to the boards of education. And in the larger chapters, there will be a representative who will go and take notes at every government meeting. And we also do lots of voter registration. Some of the most rewarding voter registrations are where citizens are being naturalized, and they sing the national anthem and cry and thank you repeatedly. They're often from places where there is no voting. So we also keep up with issues, and the national group pays legal fees for lots of suits. Right now they have won a number of suits about gerrymandering in different states. Lot goes on, a lot of information, but a commitment to empowering voters and protecting democracy.
Well, that is got to be one of the busiest organizations ever. I mean, I'm surprised you could take time out to talk to us today. That's
well, I'm through. We know our big push was, are you registered to vote? How can you register to vote? But we have put out this at numerous places. Can you see this? This is what we've put out as many places as we could find, and it is a list in Floyd County in Rome, Georgia, of where you can do early voting. But of course, I want you to know that you've got 5 counties. Yeah, I mean, I know you know, John. You've got 5 counties where there is a Georgia Highlands, and anybody can look up, just Google your county name, Board of Elections, and that will give you the website that will show you where there's early voting, the sites and the times in your county.
Well, Lucy, I know at least in recent elections, Georgia has gotten kind of a reputation for having problems, and I believe there was a push just recently to try and get paper ballots for the election this fall. That was that was not accomplished. So is that something that the League of Women Voters is mindful of and watching carefully?
Has been, and now it was not an issue once it was decided that was not going to be, that we couldn't do that. The League of Women Voters and lots of other groups have been highly concerned about where is the paper trail and how accountable is the paper trail. Now, one thing that we did here is that we had 2 open houses for all the citizens to come in, and the new voting machines were demonstrated. And when we looked at that, we reported back to the state that it looked as though there was some accountability, but we were not totally pleased with the amount of accountability. It looked as though you could get around it a lot, and it was not a perfect record of voting. It's probably hard to get that when you change machines. It's unfortunate that the problems with that happened at a presidential election, but that is what happened. We're not pushing about that specific thing right now, but the research is there, and we'll continue to look at it. But accountability is a big issue. I did election protection around Atlanta, one presidential election, and in that precinct, all the machines basically stopped working, and they couldn't get paper ballots for a long, long time. Election protection eventually got them. A lot of things can happen, and that's one of the reasons that we like to have as many people as possible join either the League of Women Voters or election protection or some group that watches. A lot of it is not fraud. It's just something can happen because elections don't happen every day. And so when you plan for it, there are a lot of things that can slip up in that distance between when there's election and when there's not. In Georgia, we have had some other problems too. So I know that, John, one thing I'm going to say is thank you for alerting me that there were some problems reported today at the Garden Lakes polling place in Floyd County. And I wasn't aware of that. I wasn't watching that.
Are you confident that things are better now in Floyd County? I know we had some issues. I know there were some meetings on those issues, but do you feel confident that those issues have been resolved in Floyd County?
Well, I'm with the League of Women Voters, so I don't think it's ever my job to be too confident about voting because it is so vulnerable. One issue was that the votes were picked up from the drop box at the library in the past election at 5:30 instead of at 7, and there wasn't a sign anywhere saying what you could do to take your vote somewhere else. Some people could have taken it to the Floyd County Board of Elections office, but I don't think that people would have known to do it. Now, that's the kind of thing, I believe that's resolved. I believe there's several other things that were resolved. It looked as though some of the poll workers, they may have been trained this way, but they didn't remember it. They didn't know what to do when a person came to the polling place with an absentee ballot. And of course, if you come to the polling place with an absentee ballot, you are allowed to vote. But the poll worker should take it, you surrender it, you sign an affidavit that says that you've done that, then you can vote. But some of the poll workers thought they didn't know that. We've kind of resolved that. So Greg, I don't know that it's ever a good idea to be too confident about the voting procedures because there's so many things that can go wrong. We're still looking.
Well, I know there's got to be some added layer of concern this year because of COVID and the pandemic. Are there restrictions in place to make in-person voting safe?
Well, there are some, but I think the safest thing to do is to not go to a poll at all. And so the ways to vote are you can vote early at one of the early polling sites. And information about that is on every county board of elections. You just Google your county and the board of elections. That's one way. We were hoping that because in Floyd County we have quite a few dates and sites, that it would spread out. But today, what you sent me from Hometown News in Floyd County, it looked as though it was crowded there. The purpose of early voting is to help people who, especially women have really a lot of trouble getting to one date, one time, because they got to go home to somebody so often, and they're often at work, and then they can't stay there 3 hours. But the way you can skip all of that is if you order an absentee ballot, you can take it any day until and including November the 3rd to one of the drop boxes in your county. In Floyd County, they were at the public library, and they're at the Floyd County Board of Elections office, which is in the old post office. It has yellow brick that's downtown, up the street from Jefferson's and across the street from the parking deck. And it's also across another street from the First Baptist Church and the Episcopal Church. You have to come in the front entrance. It was some years you could go in different entrances. This one has to be the front entrance where there's steps that have two sides. So you could just get an absentee ballot, and they have up until the polling day, the Board of Elections may only pick it up, say, from 8 to 5. On the polling day, November 3rd, they have to pick it up after 7 p.m. You don't have to go to a polling place at all.
Well, we want to follow up with that, Lucy, but we're coming up on our break here, our commercial break. So we will be right back with much more right after this. Please stay with us.
For 50 years, Georgia Highlands College has been a community that takes charge. At GHC, we have a mission to provide access to an outstanding education, meeting the career needs of the region, and helping our communities thrive. Every student we graduate becomes a celebration we never forget. We are more than Chargers. We are Chargers taking charge for 50 years and beyond.
Welcome back to Community Watch, and we're talking with Lucy Hale from the League of Women Voters. And we just got a quote from Robert Brady from the Rome News, and I will read the quote. Typically in Floyd County, you have a line that lasts 5 minutes. Today, it's taking up to 30 minutes. It's because of the huge, and I'm talking about huge turnout. That's from Robert Brady, the county's chief election clerk. And that does not fit with what we have heard from individuals who have had to wait over 3 hours today to vote. But I'm going to be optimistic and say that that's just something that's happening on this very first day of early voting, and that things may run more quickly in successive days. And I believe early voting lasts through October 30th. Is that right, Lucy? I think it.
Let me just look here and see. Yes, it is.
October 30th. So you can early vote through October 30th. And you were talking about the absentee ballots. Is it? It is, I believe. Is it too late now to apply for one, or can you still?
You can still apply for it, and you go to the Secretary of State's office online. Is the best way to do it, and it's easy. Georgia's had some nationwide coverage for problems with voting, but this year the Secretary of State's website seems quite good for as far as information and what they tell you. It's organized well and it's easy to use. So you don't have to, you can just Google something. You don't even have to have a website address. And if you go to just the Georgia Secretary of State, My Voter page, Georgia Secretary of State, My Voter page. On that page, it's too late to register to vote, but you can do everything else. You can get an absentee ballot. You can check to see, has it been sent to you? You can get that absentee ballot mailed to you, and then you can take it to a drop box and never go to the polling place. So, but there's lots of information organized very well on that site. The other site that I'm not saying this because I'm in the League of Women Voters, the vote411.org is a national site that the League of Women Voters and a number of other nonpartisan organizations sponsor. If you go to that site, just Google it, vote411.org. Then you go to Georgia, and it will tell you in a clear way just about everything you'd need to make a voter plan. And John, I want to encourage people to make a voter plan. That's what we're hearing about. Are there long lines? Is it one place? Is it not another? This year, more than I can remember, you need to plan when you're going to vote and have a backup plan also, because it's going to be there will be a large turnout, lots of places. There are new voter machines, lots of places. There are fewer poll workers because of COVID-19. This is the year, have a plan. Go to either vote411.org and/or what I have to read here, okay, it is Georgia Secretary of State, My Voter page. And that should let you know what you can do to make a plan.
Lucy, I have a question.
Okay.
Sort of off topic, but I think very relevant. I think one of the problems I see with our election system is that we focus so much on election day, and when that day happens after November the 3rd, you automatically start hearing people talking about in 4 more years. It's almost like we've been conditioned that, voting is the only thing to preserving democracy. And when you said that, I thought that was so important, that democracy requires more than just voting on that vote day. Like, that's one step, but that's not the only step. And I think sometimes so much emphasis and focus is put on voting day, and more should be done on, being an active citizen and being and participating in democracy. Because to me, democracy it requires active participation. And so I thought that was interesting that that's part of the mission of the League of Women Voters. It's preserving democracy, not just voting, but preserving democracy. Can you speak a little bit more about that? And is that a problem that you see as well?
Well, Greg, I think you stated that very well, and it's critical. And it's even critical about voting, to not think, oh, I'm going to go on November the 3rd, because that means I'm going to go unless it's too hard, unless something gets in the way. But you do have to. It's not the only election. The presidential election is not the only election even. But the League of Women Voters has to keep vigilant about many kinds of issues that come up in the government. One of the ones that we're concerned about now is how fast will Congress try to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because that's an enormous responsibility, and that may be going on after this election. And that's something that citizens should weigh in on. They should be calling their senators, they should be calling their House of Representatives, elected officials. They should be gathering together about that and other issues. And you're right, all the time. This is, I think it's an exciting year, because it's a year where we know we're being called to try to protect democracy. I mean, regardless of what side of what fence you're on, you feel that. And it is absolutely not enough to vote on November 1. Well, you can vote on November 1, but on November 3, that's not a good plan. Oh yeah, I'll go vote on November 3. Benjamin Franklin walked out of the meeting where they had developed the Constitution, and someone asked him, what happened? And he said, I think everybody knows this, he said, we've given you a republic if you can keep it. And that's everybody's responsibility.
Very true. Very true. I think that's also interesting that you said have a voter plan, because once again, I've heard stories, taking your kids to vote on voting day, and it's in November 3rd, but you are so correct. You don't want nothing to happen, but you could be in a car accident. Anything could happen on November the 3rd that could prevent you from actually voting that day. And now that we do have all these other mechanisms in place, and I'm guilty of that. It's something about traditionally voting on the 3rd. I've always had in my mind, after work, I'm going to my polling station. Now, granted, voting most of the times, like in Chattooga County, there wasn't a big problem because I voted in a very small precinct. But still, having the mindset that I don't have to wait to the 3rd because something could happen and then my vote will not count. I think that's very important, because we know, especially in today's society, and we know with historical long lines, people don't tend to want to come out. If it's storming, if the conditions are not great, they could just suppress voters. But I guess that's something we need to be talking more about in the community, is having a voting plan. I never really thought about that.
One thing that I want to mention, because this happened to me, this is years ago, and I thought I was an informed voter, but I apparently wasn't. I went to my precinct, and it's a small precinct. I went to my precinct, and I lived in the same place. The poll workers knew me, but they wouldn't let me vote because I was not on their list. I didn't know then that if that happens, or anything like that happens, you can demand to be given a provisional vote. You can vote provisionally, and then you can check in with your county board of elections to make sure they counted your provisional vote. Because it is, poll workers, I just want to thank them, because what they do is hard. They don't get hardly paid to do it. Almost all of them just do it because they're patriots. I appreciate it. But sometimes they don't know all the rules, and if they do, they may be harried, they may not tell you. If you get to a polling place, and for some reason or other, they say you can't vote, insist on getting a provisional ballot, and then check with the Board of Elections to make sure it was counted, or they tell you for sure why it was not counted. In my case, it was just a mistake. The computer had made a mistake and put me in another precinct somewhere, which they couldn't tell, but that was why. But I missed that vote.
I'm glad you brought that up, Lucy, because that has happened uh, when we have taken college students to vote in the past. There was some glitch in their having applied to register or have registered to vote or something, and they weren't on the list, and they did vote provisionally. We helped them follow up with it. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because not everybody knows that that is an option.
I didn't know it.
Yeah. I do want to ask about absentee ballots, because I'm hearing that this election in particular, they're being looked at extremely carefully, and I'm hearing people have to have, their signature has to match, maybe some other things too. Is that a concern of the League of Women Voters?
It's a big concern. I think I've been to 3 meetings about it with training, and I will tell you that it is a bit daunting because the absentee ballots are looked at very carefully. Now, I'm going to give everybody a recipe for how you can keep your vote from getting thrown out. It's really kind of simple. The absentee ballots come with instructions. This is not something you can do by just reading it quickly and trying to follow the instructions. You've got to read them a couple of times. I would go through it with a mock register, a mock filling it out a couple of times. Like you said, one of the things that's I got some training on how you would proofread it to see if that vote's going to count. One of the things is there are 2 places for signature. My name is Lucy Hale, Lucy Johnston Hale, Lucy J. Hale. If I put Lucy Hale one place on my form and I put Lucy J. Hale another, they will probably throw it out. Another thing is there's a little box that says county, C-O-N-T-Y. A lot of people quickly look at that and think it says country, and they put USA. So the way to solve and there's several other things. Get the instructions and read them next to the form as you're filling it out. Do it as a practice, then come back in and fill it out. Look it over a couple of times. There are lots of details. Most of us aren't used to filling out things where any detail like that is so critical. The other thing is, be sure your phone number is on it, and be sure that your phone number is a phone number that you do answer, because many mistakes on it, the county boards of elections will call you and give you a chance to correct those mistakes, but not if they can't get you on the phone.
Now, I hope they leave a message, because if the number.
That's absolutely right. Yes. Yeah. We hope they'd leave a message. Yeah. And I don't have any statistics on whether they do or not. I mean, I hope they do.
Well, we are coming up on the end of our time, but I want to thank you so much personally for being with us, but also for your work with the League of Women Voters.
Well, we want to thank you for having this, because we've been looking for venues where we could tell people vote early, and you don't have to go to a polling place, but you do have to get an absentee ballot in order not to go to a polling place, and you have to fill it out extremely carefully. I'd say get somebody else to proofread it with the instructions by your side. I'm proud that the League of Women Voters, along with a lot of other women's groups and other groups too, that's why we have all these early voting days. We just kept on about it because we know women need it and other people need it too. But thank you very much. Everybody, vote early, like Greg says, and don't stop looking to protect democracy after you vote.
I want to thank Lucy Hale, League of Women Voters, for being with us. And I want to thank all of you for being with us on Community Watch. We will see you next time.